I remember the first time it visited me. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive, almost breathing. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the fog outside the window thickened, pressing against the glass like it wanted in. The street lamp flickered in the distance, casting a weak, trembling glow across the room. I could hear my own breath, shallow and uneven, and the faint static hum of an old radiator somewhere down the hall. It started as a shadow at the corner of my vision, a dark, shifting shape that disappeared whenever I tried to look directly at it. At first, I told myself it was imagination, a trick of fatigue. But then the humming grew louder, vibrating to the floorboards, the walls, even the air in my lungs. Something was watching, waiting. I tried to move, to call out, but my body refused. Paralysis pressed on me like the fog outside, cold and heavy, holding me in place. I could feel its presence, silent and patient, hovering just beyond touch. Its eyes, I didn't see them, but I knew they were there, bright, observing, unblinking. The room seemed to stretch, elongate, the shadows curling toward me like smoke. I wanted to scream, to shake free, but the weight would not lift. And then, in that thin, trembling light, I saw it, or maybe it saw me, a form impossibly tall, impossibly still, standing where no one should be. That's when I realized I was no longer alone. The forest behind my childhood home was quiet, though not entirely. Mist curled around the trees, thick and slow, swallowing shapes before I could make them out. It was late autumn. Damp leaves clung to my shoes. I walked, my breath shallow, mist rising to meet it. Something moved just beyond sight. A flicker at the corner of my vision. A shadow or many. The whispers began then. Soft, unintelligible, close enough to brush my ears. But I couldn't understand a word. I reached for the moss along the path, damp and cold under my fingers. It smelled of wet earth, something old, something that had waited. And then a breath grazed my neck. I froze. Silence pressed in, thick, unnatural. The fog hung heavier, curling around the shapes. Around me, curiosity drew me forward. Fear lingered in every step, in every cautious inhale. A single pale light flickered ahead. It wasn't a lantern or the moon. It danced through the fog, flickering in ways that seemed deliberate. The shadows leaned toward it. Or perhaps it leaned toward them. I stepped closer. The smell of moss gave way to something sweeter, faintly metallic, almost like iron. The whispering continued, but slower now, patient, as if waiting. I could see shapes more clearly now, tall, thin, moving just beyond the trees. They didn't have faces I could see. They didn't move like people. The light pulsed. Softly. I thought I heard a hum under it, like wind to the branches, but steadier, deliberate. I brushed past a low branch, the leaves scratching my arms. Another shadow shifted, slipping between the trunks. And then nothing moved. The silence pressed against my ears. My own breathing sounded loud. The fog whispered in response, curling around my ankles. I knelt, touching the earth, damp, cold, alive somehow, and the breath returned. Closer, closer than before. I tried to look behind me. Only fog. No shapes. No light. The forest seemed to inhale. I could feel it in my chest, a slow, heavy pressing. The flickering light moved again. Not away, not toward. Just there, waiting. I stood, trembling. The whispers faded to silence. My hands were wet from moss. The fog clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. A shadow passed to my left. It was quick, fluid. I blinked. Nothing remained. The pale light pulsed one last time. Then it vanished. The fog remained. Thick, endless, patient. I turned back toward home, but the path had shifted. I could still feel the whispers. Soft, waiting, always just beyond understanding. And though the forest was quiet now, I knew it was not empty. It never had been. Night had settled into the corners of my room. The kind of darkness that drapes itself over everything, soft and heavy. Autumn air seeped into the cracked window, carrying the smell of damp leaves. It started as a low hum, almost like the house itself was breathing. I pressed my ear to plaster, and it pulsed there, steady, insistent. Each evening it grew louder, more urgent. I could feel in my chest a soft vibration that made my skin tingle. The whispers followed, faint at first, curling around the edges of the hum. Curiosity pulled me closer to the closet. It had always been ordinary, but now in the hum's rhythm, I noticed a small dark cavity behind the doors. I leaned in. A faint exhale brushed my cheek. It was too close, too deliberate. My fingers traced the edge of the plaster. It was cool, rough, almost alive. The hum throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I wanted to step back. I wanted to run, but my feet stayed planted. The cavity seemed to breathe in response to me, a quiet, measured inhalation. Then stillness, so thick it pressed against my ears and lungs alike. I reached out. The air inside moved as if I had disturbed a pulse that had waited for years. A rustle of cloth or skin whispered from the shadows behind the closet. I could smell it then, a faint iron scent, sharp and cold. It lingered in the edges of the room, mingling with dust and the hum. I stepped back, heart hammering. The hum softened, as if it were amused by my hesitation. The whispers reshaped into something almost recognizable. I thought I caught a syllable, a fragment of a word meant only for me. I dared to peek. The cavity was empty. No shapes, no hands, no light, but the air had changed. It felt denser, heavier, like the room itself had leaned closer, listening. I pressed my palm to the wall. The hum followed the curve of my hand, sliding beneath my fingers, teasing. I could feel it in my bones, beneath the skin, beneath my thoughts. I left the closet untouched after that. Every night, the hum returned. Every night, the whispers waited just beyond the plaster. And each time, I felt that if I listened too closely, I might hear something I was not meant to understand. By morning, the room would be still again, but the memory lingered, a quiet vibration beneath my skin, like a warning or an invitation. I never opened that cavity again, but the hum never left. It waits, patient in the walls. I woke to darkness, thick, heavy, pressing against my eyelids. My body refused to move. The shadows in my room thickened, curling around the corners, stretching along the walls. A shape emerged from a gloom, tall, still, blurred at the edges, as if the air itself bent around it. I could only watch. It leaned over me. Its presence carried a weight I could feel in my chest, in my bones. There was a hum, soft, low, almost a vibration beneath my skin. It traced the air beside my face. Not sound, not music. Something I felt more than heard. I tried to speak. Nothing left my mouth. My hands twitched. My legs stayed frozen. The figure remained, motionless, yet somehow alive. It lingered at the edge of my perception, bending the shadows around it. I could smell it then, a faint coldness, like metal left out in winter. It mingled with the stale air of my bedroom. The room felt smaller, tighter. The dark thickened. Even the moonlight slipping through the blinds seemed afraid to enter. I dared a breath. It did not respond. It only hovered, humming along with the rhythm of my own heart. Morning came slowly. Light seeped through the blinds, hesitant. The figure was gone. No footprints. No trace. No whisper left behind. Only the lingering chill. That weight in my chest. The echo of a hum fading like it had never existed. I sat up. The shadows retreated. But the memory remained, a quiet, insistent presence in the corners of my mind. I could not move it. I could not understand it. I could only remember. And each night since, when the darkness grows heavy, I feel it again, leaning close, waiting. Night pressed against the windows. Fog rolled low across the ground, curling like smoke through the trees. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and something older. I saw it first outside my window. A figure, distant, holding a lantern. Its light was dim, flickering, barely piercing the gray that swallowed the street. I called out. No sound left my mouth. The fog twisted around the lantern like it had a life of its own, curling and coiling, obscuring everything else. I pressed closer to the glass. The figure didn't move, not like a person. Its presence seemed deliberate, patient. The fog pressed in, carrying it closer, like the night itself had reached a hand toward me. By morning, it was gone. Only the frost remained, etched with strange symbols I didn't recognize. Delicate, precise, almost whispered into being. I touched the glass. Cold, smooth, the frost flaked under my fingers, leaving faint traces of the shapes behind. All day, I felt its presence. Not outside, not visible, but in the corners of my vision, in the quiet spaces between sounds. That night, I watched again, hoping to see the pale lantern flicker. Hoping, though I knew it would vanish. The fog rolled heavier, swallowing the trees. The streetlights flickered against it, dim and uncertain. I imagined the figure there, moving closer, waiting. I could smell it then, faintly, through the glass, metal, smoke, and something not of this world. And though the lantern never returned, the symbols lingered in my mind, a pattern I could not understand, a message I could not read. The fog outside continued its slow, curling dance, and I felt the quiet certainty of something watching from its depths. Not angry, not cruel, just waiting. The bathroom was cold. Late evening light crept in, weak and gray, touching the tiles with a pale hand. Steam from the sink lingered in the corners, curling like smoke. I stared into the mirror. At first, only my pale face, trembling slightly under my own gaze. Then movement behind me. Not a reflection, a shadow, dark, tall, fluid. It mimicked my motions, but with a slight delay, a hesitation that made my chest tighten. I spun around. Nothing. Only the bathroom. Only the faint smell of soap and damp air. The mirror remained, watching, waiting. Over time, it became harder to look away. Each glance revealed subtle shifts. Edges of the shadow stretched. Fingers lingering at the glass. Eyes I could not see followed me, always patient. The reflection hummed with life I could not touch. Its movements were my own, yet somehow wrong. I caught myself blinking too long, afraid to open my eyes. The air felt heavier there, cold against my skin, metallic, faint, as if iron dust floated just out of reach. I tried avoiding the mirror. I tried looking elsewhere, but it was everywhere I went, a soft presence in every reflective surface, waiting until I noticed. Even now, I feel behind me, a shadow lingering where the light fades, watching, learning. I do not know if it is patient or hungry, but I know it waits. And mirrors do not lie. The attic stairs groaned beneath my weight. Night had wrapped the house in silence, thick and patient. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic. Footsteps echoed before I reached the top. I froze. No one lived up there. The floorboards creaked again under my careful steps. A box rattled in the corner. Small movements that made the shadows shift. Breathing slowed, cautious, trying not to startle whatever waited. I reached the box. It was old, worn, empty, except for a single mark pressed into the dust. A pale handprint. Small, delicate, too defined to be just smudged dirt. The rustling continued. Soft, deliberate. It moved around me, brushing along the rafters, unseen but alive. I pressed my palm to the box. Cold dust clung to my fingers. The air felt heavier, thickening with the rhythm of something waiting, watching. A shadow shifted near the beams. I caught it out of the corner of my eye. Then it vanished. I stepped back. The handprint remained, stubborn, unmoving. The attic smelled sharper now, iron mixed with old wood, something alive in its scent. I could hear faint whispers in the folds of darkness, just beneath understanding. I wanted to leave, but something held me there, curiosity tangled with fear. I turned, listening. Silence, almost comforting. And then a soft thump, then another, like small footsteps pacing the corner of the room. I climbed down slowly, every creak of the stairs echoing in the empty house. The box stayed behind, handprint pressed into dust. I could feel eyes on me as I descended. By the time I reached the bottom, the night felt colder. The attic waited, patient. The rustling would come again, and I knew when it did, I would hear it first, before anything else. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of my phone. Night pressed against the walls, heavy and still. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and dust. It started as static, a low, crackling hum from the speaker, soft at first, almost unnoticeable. Then I heard it, words, faint, like a whisper trying to form through the interference. I see you. I froze, heart hammering. The words repeated, softer, curling around the edges of static. Each vibration of the phone carried the same warning. Even when I dropped it, it rang again, though no one was dialing. I pressed the phone to my ear. The voice, or whatever it was, grew clearer, familiar, yet wrong, a distorted echo, tugging at the edges of memory. I could feel it through the vibrations in my hand, through my chest, through the silence that followed each pulse of static. The hum of the phone became a rhythm. Soft footsteps in the corners of my room, matching the pulses. Shadows shifted behind the furniture, leaning toward the phone, toward me. I tried to ignore it, turn it off, set it down, but the sound found me. Even in the quiet, I felt it waiting, watching, through the glass, through the vibrations, through the dark. I could smell it faintly then, metal, electric, something that clung to the edges of the air. The room seemed smaller, heavier. Each night, it returned, the same soft words, the same crackle of static, the same pulse, waiting, patient, just beyond my control. I left the phone across the room that night. Still it hummed, I see you, and I knew in the quiet it always would. The fog rolled in thick, swallowing the streetlights first, then the trees, then the edges of my house. It pressed against the glass, curling like smoke into the corners of the room. I leaned close to the window. The cold bit my fingers. The glass fog beneath my breath. Shapes began to form. Humanoid, though wrong, moving slowly, deliberately, against the grain of the mist. Each night, I watched. Curiosity tethered me to the pain. Fear pressed at my back, soft but constant. The figure came closer. Not human, not fully. Its edges blurred into the fog, yet its gaze felt tangible, heavy. I could hear nothing. Only the soft shift of the mist against the glass. Only the quiet pulse of my own heartbeat. One night, it lingered just beyond the garden. I imagined it slipping inside, carried on the breath of fog curling through the window. The room smelled damp, metallic, like the fog itself carried iron in its veins. I could feel its presence pressing closer. I wanted to look away, to retreat, but I could not. The fog thickened again, swallowing the street. Shapes drifted within it, patient and slow. The figure stepped closer each night, until I felt it almost in the room with me. I leaned back from the glass. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. Even the furniture felt like it had shifted toward the window, toward the fog. I tried to sleep. The shape lingered in the edges of vision, always patient, always waiting. By morning, the street reappeared. The fog receded, thin and harmless. But I knew it would return, and with it, the figure, watching, moving, waiting. The cabin was quiet, but not silent. The walls seemed to inhale as I entered, exhale with a rhythm that pressed against my chest. Pine and damp earth lingered in the air, sharp and cold. At night, the room shifted. The air moved around me. Subtle at first, brushing my skin like fingertips. It pressed close, patient, alive. Whispers curled through the seams of the walls. Soft, unintelligible, yet urgent. Every word seemed to carry a warning I couldn't decode. The corners felt heavier. Shadows pooled there, thick and waiting. I could hear the faintest scraping, soft footsteps that didn't belong to me. I pressed my palm to the wall. It moved slightly, a soft yielding under my fingers. The hum of the cabin's breath thrummed through my bones. I tried to move. The air resisted. A weight pressed into me, gentle but unyielding, as if the room itself were aware. The smell shifted then, warm, metallic, almost like blood, carried faintly through the wooden seams. I could feel it curling in the corners, brushing the back of my neck. A shadow passed along the far wall. I blinked. Nothing remained, only the pulse of the cabin, inhaling and exhaling around me. I climbed into bed, heart racing. The walls seemed to lean closer, listening. The whispers grew faint, teasing, retreating just out of understanding. I lay awake, feeling the corners watch. Patient, waiting. The room breathed with me, and I could do nothing but listen. Its rhythm synced to my own, slow, deliberate. Every inhale, every exhale, carried me deeper into its presence. By morning, the air was still. The whispers faded. The room seemed ordinary again. But I knew, deep in the edges of my mind, when night returned, the walls would breathe once more, and I would be alone with them. The hallway stretched into darkness. Evening light filtered weakly through the curtains, brushing the floor with pale, uneven stripes. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold wood, and something older. Shadows moved along the walls. Not from the lamps. Not from me. They slinked and shifted, twisting in ways the light should not allow. Each night, a figure emerged, silent, patient, pacing just beyond the edge of vision. Cold footprints marked the floor, fading before morning. Its rhythm matched mine. I stopped moving, but it continued, always following, waiting. I pressed my hand against the wall. The shadows shifted, not retreating, not yielding, just aware. The hallway smelled sharper, metallic now, like something left in winter air. Every corner seemed deeper, darker. I could feel the presence curling around me, soft but heavy. I tried to leave the hallway. My feet hesitated. Each step echoed faintly, but the figure did not pause. I could hear in the silence a subtle rustle, brushing along the edges of floorboards. I held my breath, waiting, but it did not falter. By morning, the hallway seemed ordinary again, empty, quiet, harmless. But the cold footprints haunted the edges of my mind. Each night I returned. Each night it paced, its presence patient, lingering, impossible to escape. The shadows in the hall waited, always waiting. The house was quiet, but the silence was thin. It pressed against the walls, settling in corners, brushing across the floorboards. Late at night, it carried a sound, soft, fragile, familiar, a lullaby, faint, crackling through the static of my old radio. My grandmother's voice, though she had been gone for years. The melody wound through the house, slow and deliberate. It made my breath shallow, each note brushing against my chest like a hand. The sound seemed to pull me toward the dark corners, toward spaces I knew I shouldn't enter. I leaned closer to the radio. The hum of static whispered beneath the voice, carrying the song deeper, curling around the walls. It smelled faintly of old paper and cold metal, a scent that clung to the edges of memory. I tried turning it off. The lullaby lingered, folding into the silence, soft but insistent. Every note tugged at something I could not name, drawing me closer to the shadows at the edges of the room. I could feel shapes shifting in the corners, slow movements, deliberate, almost dancing to the rhythm of the song. They were patient, waiting for me to notice. The air grew heavier, colder. I pressed my fingers to the radio, the metal warm against my skin. The hum continued beneath the melody, vibrating faintly through the floor. I wanted to leave, but the lullaby pulled me forward, soft and coaxing. It was not cruel, not threatening, just waiting. By morning, the house returned to ordinary quiet. The radio sat dark and silent, but the memory of her voice lingered, haunting the edges of my mind. And at night, when the world is still, I can still hear it, soft, patient, calling me toward the shadows. The room was black, thick, heavy, as if the darkness had weight. I lay still, heart pounding, and listened. It was there, breathing, shallow, slow just behind me. I tried to turn my head. Nothing. My body refused. Paralyzed, though my mind screamed to move. The air pressed close, curling around my skin, smelling faintly of iron and cold wood. Each inhale carried the faintest rustle, as if something shifted beneath the floorboards. I could feel it, a presence coiled around the edges of the bed, not moving but aware, waiting. The silence thickened between breaths. The shadows in the corners deepened, curling toward the center of the room. I could almost see the shape, crouched just out of sight. I tried to speak. A whisper caught in my throat. The dark swallowed it whole. Time stretched. Minutes became hours. The breathing continued, steady, deliberate. Every exhale pressed against my chest, heavier than before. By morning I was free. The air cleared. The shadows retreated. But the room still smelled faintly of iron. And I knew when night returned, the presence would return with it. Silent, patient, waiting. Night pressed down on the house. The air smelled faintly of rain and cold tar, lingering in the corners of the roof. I lay in bed listening. First, a single step, then another, slow, deliberate, pacing across the roof above me. I crept to the window. Nothing moved outside. The street was empty. The trees barely whispered in the wind. The footsteps returned. A rhythm, steady, matching the pulse of my chest. I held my breath. Each thumb pressed against the ceiling like a heartbeat not my own. I pressed my hand to glass. Cold, the hum of the house beneath me seemed to vibrate in time with the steps. They circled the roof, slow, patient. I tried calling out. No sound left my mouth. The air smelled metallic, faint, like rain on iron. The darkness pressed closer. Every shadow in the room seemed to lean toward the ceiling, listening. Night after night, it returned, the footsteps pacing, echoing, insistent, matching my own heartbeat more than I wanted to notice. By morning, silence. The roof looked ordinary, still, empty, yet I could feel it lingering in the edges of the day, waiting, patient, always returning with the dark. And when the house sleeps again, I know it will return, footstep by footstep, above me, matching my pulse. The window sat across from my bed, alone, unremarkable, yet I felt its presence every night. The glass was cold against my fingers, misted with evening dew. I noticed the first face when I wasn't looking, pale, pressed flat against the glass, eyes wide, unblinking. I tried covering it. Curtains, blankets, even the fog glass. The eyes never left, always there, patient, watching. Night deepened. I could feel them from across the room. Something heavy pressed in the corners of the ceiling and floor. I leaned close to the window. The air smelled faintly metallic, like frost on iron. The faces didn't move. Not like humans. Not yet. I stepped back. The shadows in the room seemed to lean toward the glass. Curious, waiting. The eyes multiplied, pressing closer to the edges of the pane. Sleep felt impossible. Even blinking brought them back. Watching, waiting. By morning, they vanished. The glass reflected only my pale, trembling face. But the memory lingered. I could feel them in the corners. At night, when the darkness thickens, I sense them again. Patient, insistent, always watching. The forest swallowed the light. Fog rolled low, thick, curling around the trunks like smoke. Leaves pressed wet against my shoes. Shapes emerged. Humanoid, but wrong. They drifted through the mist, moving slowly, deliberately. I ran. Branches scratched my arms. My breath came in sharp bursts. The figures did not falter. I could feel their gaze on my back. Heavy, patient, unyielding. Not falling like humans do, but always there. The fog pressed closer, cold and damp, curling around my legs, brushing against my face. The shapes shifted in the mist, never revealing details, only outlines. I stumbled, reaching for the mossy ground. The forest smelled of wet earth, decay and iron. The figures drifted closer, patient, silent, watching. I stopped, held my breath. They waited too, not moving, yet present. Every exhale of mine seemed to echo through the fog, carrying my presence to them. I ran again. The mist twisted, hiding the path I thought I knew. The shapes followed, always patient, always observing. By the time I reached the edge of the trees, daylight barely touched the ground. The figures lingered in the fog, watching, waiting. And I knew the next time the mist rolls in, they will be there again. Slow, silent, patient. The hallway was silent, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. Night pressed against the walls, curling into the corners, brushing along the floor. A door whispered my name, softly, patiently, so quiet I almost doubted it existed. I hesitated. Curiosity tugged, a thread through the fog of fear. The whisper repeated, urging me closer. I reached the knob, cold metal under my fingers. The air pressed closer, curling around my wrist. I opened the door. Darkness greeted me. Not empty, not still. The whisper followed, soft and insistent, wrapping around the shadows. I could feel it there, patient, watching, waiting. The hallway outside seemed farther away. The air inside the door smelled faintly metallic, like iron and damp stone. I wanted to step back, to close it, but my feet stayed. I listened. The darkness breathed, and the whisper lingered, curling along the edges of my awareness. By morning, the hallway was ordinary again. The door looked normal. No sound, no hint of the night's insistence. Yet I know the whisper waits. Patient, soft, insistent. And when night returns, it will call my name again. The bedroom was still, too still. Night pressed against the walls, thick and patient. I could feel it before I saw it. Something crouched under the bed, invisible, yet heavy in presence. The air felt colder there, brushing my ankles like fingers. I knelt, heart hammering. The shadows shifted slightly, aware, pressing against the mattress as if it knew I was looking. I tried to breathe quietly. The darkness seemed to listen, curling closer with each exhale. A faint metallic scent lingered, sharp, iron-like. I reached toward the floor. Nothing met my hand, but the weight remained, the sense of eyes just out of sight. I could hear the room settling around me. Floorboards creaked. The hum of the house whispered. Every sound echoed through the dark, reaching the corners where the shadow waited. I stepped back, trembling. The presence remained. Patient, insistent. By morning, the bed seemed ordinary, empty, innocent, but I knew better. At night, it returns, crouched, watching, pressing against the mattress. I am never alone under the bed, and it never leaves. The window was cold against my fingers. Fog pressed outside, curling like smoke along the glass. The night smelled faintly of damp wood and wet earth. Hands appeared, pale, delicate, unmoving, pressed against the frosted glass, waiting. I ran to the door. By the time I reached it, they had vanished, but I knew they would return. Each night, they came closer, tracing shapes across the glass. Slow, patient, observing. The air smelled sharper then, metallic, cold, lingering where the hands had touched. I could feel the pressure of their presence through the pain. I tried ignoring them, closing blinds, turning away, but the hands always returned, always closer than the night before. I could hear faint rustling outside, brushing against the walls. The fog whispered through the edges of the window. By morning, the glass reflected only my pale face, empty, innocent, but at night the hands returned, patient, silent, tracing shapes across the window as though reading something I cannot see. I feel them even now in the corners of the room, waiting, and I know they always will. The corner of the room held a chair, old, wooden, unassuming, yet I felt it watching even when I wasn't looking. It moved slowly, at first barely noticeable, a shift in the shadow. Then one night it rocked back and forth, soft, deliberate, like someone breathing through it. I avoided it, turned my eyes, walked around it, tried to pretend it was still, but the silence it carried was louder than any sound. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something sharp, metallic. It clung to the edges of the room, pressing against my senses. I waited for movement. Each creak of the floorboard seemed amplified, echoing through the empty house. The chair never hurried. It only waited. One night it stopped moving, and the silence was so thick, so complete, it pressed against my chest. I could feel it leaning toward me, patient, watching. By morning it looked ordinary, empty, harmless, but the memory lingered. The chair waits in the corner, patient, silent, always waiting for night to return. The hallway was dark, stretching longer than it should. Night pressed against the walls, curling into every corner. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and cold stone. A voice called, soft, familiar, yet distorted, pulling at the edges of memory. I stepped forward. The words tugged at me, gentle but insistent. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed by the shadows. I reached the end of the hall. Nothing moved. No one was there. The voice called again. I followed it, each word fragmented, impossible to fully understand. Yet I felt its meaning, heavy and urgent, pressing against my chest. The shadows shifted as I walked. They leaned closer, curling along the walls, brushing my shoulders, my hair. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron dust drifting in the dark. I tried to turn back. The voice pulled me onward, patient, insistent, always just beyond sight. By morning, the hallway was empty, silent, harmless, yet the memory of the voice lingered in the corners of my mind. At night, it returns, soft, distorted, familiar, tugging at the edges of my memory. Waiting, the mirrors were everywhere. Bathroom, hallway, the small glass in the foyer. I barely noticed them at first. Then the faces appeared. Pale, hollow, not mine. They moved when I did not. Watching, waiting. I caught one in the hallway mirror. Its eyes met mine, empty, patient, impossible to ignore. I blinked. It lingered. I turned, heart hammering. No one was there. Only my own reflection, pale and trembling. The air grew heavier, metallic, faint like iron dust. Shadows pulled in the corners, curling toward the mirrors, patient. I tried covering them. I tried avoiding them. But the faces multiplied, reflecting in each other, layering endlessly. I could feel them watching from every angle. Every glance betrayed my presence. Every reflection whispered silently, pressing against the edges of my mind. By morning, the glass seemed ordinary again, yet the memory of those hollow faces lingered. Patient, waiting. At night, they return. Not mine, not human, but aware, and I can do nothing but watch. The fog rolled in thick again. It pressed against the windows, curling along the street, swallowing every light. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and cold stone. It began to hum, soft, rhythmic, almost musical. I leaned closer to the glass. The vibrations pressed against my chest. Whispers shaped themselves within it. Warnings. Faint syllables I could not understand. They moved along the edges of my awareness, curling around my thoughts. Something waited beyond the fog. Patient, watching. Not hurried, not desperate, just aware. The shapes in the mist shifted, elongated, blurred, humanoid but not human. I could feel their gaze pressing, heavy, patient. I stepped closer. The hum followed, vibrating beneath my feet. The fog seemed to lean in, curling tendrils along the glass, brushing my fingers. The air smelled metallic, cold, iron in the mist. It wrapped around me, pressing against my skin, curling in my hair. I could not move forward. I could not step back. The fog hummed, patient, insistent, waiting for something I could not name. By morning, the street reappeared. The fog thinned. The hum faded. But I knew it would return. Patient, waiting. And I would hear it again, soft, insistent, and impossible to ignore. The room was silent, yet heavy. Darkness pressed against the walls, curling into corners, brushing my skin. I could feel shapes moving, just beyond the edge of my vision. Sleep paralysis gripped me, heavier than ever. My body refused to obey. My mind screamed, but my limbs were locked in place. The shadows danced in the corners, slow, deliberate, taunting, their edges blurred, impossible to focus on, yet unmistakably there. I tried to move my hand. Nothing. I tried my legs. Nothing. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp like iron and rain. Each breath felt thick, pressing in on my chest. The shadows moved closer with every heartbeat, patient, aware of my awareness. I could hear faint whispers curling through the darkness. Indistinct syllables, coaxing, mocking. The silence between them was louder than any sound. Time stretched, elastic. Minutes felt like hours. I could only watch, shivering, unable to act. By morning, the paralysis faded. The shadows retreated. The air was ordinary again. But I knew they waited, patient, persistent. And the next night, when I lie down, I will be frozen in place again. Helpless, watching. The fog swallowed everything. Streetlights, trees, even the edges of my own yard vanished beneath its weight. The air was damn cold and smelled faintly of wet stone and iron. A single light flickered in the distance. Pale, weak. It moved slowly, suspended between the fog and me. I stepped toward it. Curiosity pressed me forward. mingled with fear curling in my chest. Each step made the fog thicken, pressing against my skin. The light flickered again. Closer now, but not for me. I realized then it waited for something else. Something I could not see. The air carried a faint hum, low, almost imperceptible. It vibrated through the fog, brushing against my ankles and wrists. The shadows shifted in response, leaning toward the light. I tried to retreat, but the fog moved faster, curling around my legs, brushing my fingers with cold dampness. The light pulsed, patient, waiting. I stopped, chest tight, heart hammering. It was not meant for me. I could only watch as it flickered, drawing closer to something unseen. By morning, the light was gone. The fog thinned. The street reappeared. Yet the memory lingered, pale, insistent, patient. And I knew if I returned after nightfall, the last light would return as well, waiting for something other than me. The house was empty. The fog pressed into the windows, curling along the floors and walls. Shadows thickened in the corners, patient and still. I could feel it, not moving yet present, waiting, watching. The air smelled faintly metallic, cold, iron lingering on my skin. Every breath I took seemed to echo through the silence, carrying my presence to whatever lingered in the dark. I moved slowly, each step careful, deliberate. The floorboards creaked beneath me, soft, insignificant, but enough to draw attention. The shadows shifted, edges blurred. The darkness pressed closer, brushing against my legs, my arms, my back. It was patient, insistent. I realized then I had never been truly alone, only in name. The presence had always been there, waiting. The fog thickened further, pressing against the windows, curling along the walls. I stopped, breathed, accepted it, and in that quiet, I understood I was not leaving. It would not leave, and perhaps that alone would last forever. The shadows leaned in closer. The fog pressed harder, and I waited, too,